I'm glad. I'm
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
How are we all
Hi,
doing?
Rabbi.
How are
Baruch
you? How are you,
Hashem.
Paula?
Baruch
Hi, Jerry.
Hashem.
Hi, Karen.
Hi.
How are we doing? Okay, let me just do this.
Are you in the school?
I am. All right. Everybody sees me?
Yep.
Okay. Well, not in the school. I'm in the yeshiva. There's a
Right.
lot of different educational institutions here in Baltimore. This is where Shua learns. This is the Masifta. Yeah, last time I was in the Cheder, where all the rest of the kids learned in Baltimore, the
How
kind of the
far
elementary.
are they from each other?
10 minutes.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, all in the Park Heights district of which is the Yerushalayim of Maryland, I guess is
Amazing.
anyways, all right. Let's jump in. So this week's Torah portion is Parshat Emor, right? And Parshat Emor is a unique contrast, one could say, to Parshat Kedoshim. It's interesting that while I say the unique contrast, by sort of the verbiage, you would assume that they're pretty similar. Because Parshat Kedoshim is all about be holy. Kedoshim tiyu ki kadoshani, right? Be holy because I am holy. And this Parsha is also about being holy. And again, it says in this Parsha multiple times, you shall be holy. So, okay, so it must be that the rhetoric is going to be quite similar. But in fact, they're very different from each other. And perhaps you can even say a little bit with a different thrust, dare I say, seemingly an opposite thrust. And I will preface what I mean by this by pointing, by kind of going back to a conversation I was having earlier with somebody in the community who is really now into dikduk pronunciation, proper pronunciation of words, pointed out something interesting that the Az Yashir is when his dikduk teacher told him the Az Yashir. There's the paragraph that leads into the Song of the Sea, and we all know it. It's in the davening of Vayosha, Hashem and God save the Jewish people, etc., etc. And then it says right before the Az Yashir, the final words, the final sentence before the Az Yashir, it says Vayiru ha'am et Hashem, vayaminu ba'Hashem v'Moshe avdo. And the people were in awe of God or feared God, and they believed in God and Moshe his servant. Right? Vayiru, right? The word yiru means to fear God, but it also means
To see?
to see.
Yeah.
And if you're not careful with the dikduk or the dikduk, to say that more pronounced, it's actually an interesting story. We're actually going to harken back to it. That somebody came to the Rebbe and was complaining that he believed that based on his observance of the Chabad system, the Chabad does not put enough focus on dikduk. He was telling the Rebbe. So he felt that the academic institutions of Chabad are not focusing enough on the dikduk. So the Rebbe says, firstly, dikduk.
Exactly. That's very good.
And but either way, he was saying that that there
Can I
while the words
drop a comment? My ex-father-in-law, who just passed away last year, was considered one of the world-renowned living experts on the Hebrew language in Dikduk. And he was very much a mitnaged, but somehow became very friendly with all these Chabad rabbis because the Chabad rabbis were always coming to him and asking him Hebrew questions.
Wow.
So you'll
So
see,
they
it's
all
actually going to
became
be
very friendly.
very good, good. And that's actually very interesting. Where was this?
In Texas, Austin.
Excellent. Very interesting. Very interesting. I'll tell you because that will actually feature in the kind of the course of this conversation. I got a little sign saying that my internet connection is unstable. So if it starts to get a little choppy, you'll let me know. Either way, so He is saying that that the words seem synonymous. Vayiru, right? You'll see, or and they saw, or they feared. But that's where tiktok is important because there's something called the shvana and the shvanach. Shvana means you kind of breeze your way through the shva and don't really give it any pronunciation. And the shvanach is that you rest on it, right?
Ah,
And so you
I've
can either
never
say
heard
vayir.
it.
No, this is
That's
not
great.
right. Well, that's I was just explaining what it means: a moving shva or a resting shva. Shvana means a moving shva, and a shvanach means a resting one.
Exactly.
So the shva. So you can either say vayiru, or well, let me be more particular. You can either say vayiru, right? So you hear clearly the resh and the aleph vayiru, or you can say vayireu. Because under the yud is
oh,
the
you give
pirik,
it
by
an actual
yire, and
pronunciation.
under the resh is the shva, and you can either pause on that and go or you can just kind of breeze through it, vayiru or vayireu, and said that would be the way to differentiate.
Rabbi, I
And
took a look at the tikkun that you use up on the bima. It's it's shvach. Let's just say the tikkun I use that I used to use. This is not an issue. Either you read what the way it is correctly explained in the tikkun, or you get it wrong. But there's no question. Yours, oh my goodness, I understand your colleague who has this problem with tiktuk.
right. So I mean, and this is a little bit kind of what kind of picking this apart a little bit. Is it depends, by the way, each tikkun and depends which tikkun you were referring to, because
Exactly.
but also I don't have that the tikkun that's on the bima doesn't belong to me. It's but I'm not going to, in a sense, absolve myself, etc. But either way, um, um, the point is that you have these differentiations, right? And this person went so far, and this is why he was commenting, because the person was the Dikduk teacher was being, I guess, deliberately bombastic to be stark and to say that the pronunciation is the difference between truth and blasphemy. Because to say it vayiru and not give it the re'u is to say that they saw God, and God says, no person could see me. And
And live.
so to say that is blasphemy. So I said we can tone it down a little bit. I understand in a sense, the pedagogical device in trying to really kind of like shock the senses of how careful we have to be with the dikduk. Obviously, nobody's going to be accused of blasphemy if they don't pronounce the shvanach in that regard. Having said that, it's something very interesting historically that we see that Sfardim put a very strong focus on dikduk. Other kind of Ashkenazim, but it's interesting that most Haredi communities that are very nobody can fault them for their devotion to their Yiddishkeit and their attention they give to their Yiddishkeit and how much they sacrifice for the Yiddishkeit, etc., etc. Not only do they not focus on dikduk, but historically they deliberately disregard dikduk. And it is a fascinating discussion about history. And it was, as a result, it was in direct reaction to what was happening with the Enlightenment movement, when you had the Haskalah movement, that was, in a sense, doing worse than, in a sense, leaving Judaism. They weren't leaving Judaism. What they were attempting to do was, in a sense, to co-opt Judaism, to take control of Yiddishkeit and to shift it very firmly into a more a secular approach. And what they did is they therefore doubled down and really focused on the academic aspects of Judaism: language, history, etc., philosophy. and they turned Judaism. Their efforts were to turn Judaism in this regard, and they were for a while incredibly successful. Incredibly successful. Many yeshivas closed down, and it's hard for us now, in kind of centuries later, to be armchair quarterbacks and to say, you know, in hindsight, this was right or this was wrong, because we, to a certain degree, don't really, and I think it is fair to say that we can't really understand the extent as to what the war that was being waged, and it was an absolute war. We know, like, for example, the Chassam Sofer, one of the great, obviously, scholars and great names in Jewish history. And he was from Pressburg, so this was the middle of. He was literally almost at the epicenter. He was trying to, and he was one of those that was holding firm his community, and the Ashkenazi, the greater Ashkenazic world, kind of holding firmly to the principles, et cetera, while the Enlightenment movement was making, it was having a tremendous impact. He forbade. He said anybody who walks into a shul where they have moved the bima to the front of the shul, which was one of the things that the Haskalah movement was doing and mimicking the church, right? Everything happens in the front, and you all sit in the pews in the back. The bima was always in the center of the shul. The chazin's lectern in the front, but the bima was always in the back. I mean, not in the back, God forbid, in the center, among the people, because the davening is a communal effort. The chazin's leading the davening, but he's not doing the davening. But to kind of mimic the church setup, is everything's happening up front, and everybody else is really just observers. You're in the pews. You're sitting in the pews. You're spectators.
Or the audience.
Right. And when that started to become in fashion, he says any such shul you're not allowed to walk into under pain of excommunication. You walk into such a shul.
Extreme.
No, and the Chassam Sofer was quite an extreme. If you think basically Pressburg, if you know where Pressburg is, it's the border between Germany and Hungary. It's like the Hungarian fire is not just the Satmar Hasidim. Interestingly enough, the Satmar Hasidim are not really Hasidim. They were actually more of the Litvish persuasion back in the day, which is why if you're going to be medayik, if you're going to apply dikduk to Satmar, you'll notice that they don't really say a Satmar Rebbe, they say a Satmar Ruv, the Rav of Satmar, because they in a sense the Rebbe, the line of Rebbes were less Rebbes and more rabbinic, Ravs. But that's its own story. But the thing is, it was more the hot-blooded Hungarian attitude. In fact, reform began in Hungary simultaneously, or even a little bit earlier, but separate and apart from reform. The Hungarian had their own version of enlightenment that was not the same Haskalah. It was parallel, but it wasn't the exact same in the sense group or kind of the same actors. It was its own, even though they were philosophical parallels between them, but they called it the neologue, which has the word neo, like the new log, the new philosophy, as it were, the neologue synagogue. And it's very interesting that immediately the neologue's attitude was we have to become more secular, we have to get more involved, stop speaking Yiddish, we have to speak Hungarian, we have to fashion our synagogues in the way the churches look, right? Big soaring chapels with, again, with everything happening in the front and all, and everything happening in the back. The Chassam Sofer, again, was kind of straddling the Ashkenazi community based out of Germany and the Ashkenazi community based out of Hungary. And he issued his edicts, and it says to preserve the communities. And one of the things he said is that you're absolutely not allowed to walk into such a synagogue. And as he said, then his kind of principles gets later further disseminated by many of his colleagues and many of those who are following his directives, to the point where the way it worked in Hungary was anybody who went to a neologue synagogue, chose to speak Hungarian in their home rather than Yiddish, was excommunicated out of the schools. Whatever you are part of the poison, you're part of the cancer, you're out. So how did the neologue community respond in kind to this kind of full frontal barrage from the kind of the traditional community? They said anybody who speaks Yiddish is excommunicated from us. So you had basically, if you speak Yiddish, you're excommunicated. If you don't speak Yiddish, you're excommunicated. Speak Hungarian, you're excommunicated. It's like very bright lines. So there's actually a group, a community in Hungary. They actually have a relatively beautiful show that they built, where they said, you know what, we're not going to be that extreme. We'll be the bridge. A little bit of Yiddish, a little bit Hungarian, kind of we're the moderates, right? We'll keep the traditional values, at the same time embrace the world around us and all that kind of stuff. And they call themselves, what do you call yourself? When you're trying to say that we're kind of just like, we're in the middle, we're not going to either extreme. They call themselves Kehila Kadosha, the holy community of, as you see that in pretty much every show, the Kuf, apostrophe Kuf, right?
Right.
Kehila Kadosha of the, what's they call themselves, status quo. And that's
From
how it's
now on,
actually
I'm going
written.
to say it that way.
It's actually etched into the lintel. Shin tes aleph tes vav samach status quo. Kuf vav vav aleph vav.
Unbelievable.
And they were called the status quo community. They called themselves the status quo community, and they to be the bridge between these two communities. To say we get along with everybody. Which at which point they were promptly excommunicated by both communities. Which is funny, but obviously a little bit sad as well. But I say to give you a sense of the burning passions in this regard, which will kind of clarify what ended up happening by many a Haredi community. Many a Haredi community said, look, what you're doing is you are taking and you are literally co-opting, dare we say, perverting Judaism. You have reduced Judaism to this academia, to this philosophy. You made it almost like a secular subject rather than something that we devote our lives to, a relationship with God that transcends.
I have to say, I understand that argument. That's the way I was raised, really, now that I look back on it.
Right. So how did they respond? They decided we're going to make a deliberate point of showing that our Yiddishkeit transcends the academic. And so they basically disregarded dikduk. They said dikduk is not important.
Because it was part of that academic.
Because it wasn't like they just decided dikduk was important, but this is one of the ways they are going to make a clear distinction between this approach and that approach. It's not like they didn't care about dikduk in principle, but they said, stop. If you're making it about dikduk, you're reducing your relationship with Judaism,
True,
reducing
but I
what
mean,
Judaism is.
if you ignore dikduk, it's almost like an affront to the holy language. I mean, it's really.
So again,
especially when you're laning.
Huh?
Especially when you're laning.
Right.
I can understand.
So what they will say
giving it.
Again, so as I said, we're armchair quarterbacking, right? Because again, we don't really understand, in a sense, the depth of what was occurring then, and the decisions, and in a sense, the context in which the decisions were made. But to a certain degree, it's like almost saying, if you are pouring out your heart to your parent or whatever it is, and you're maybe mumbling a little bit, and you're not articulating your words, do your parents really care as long as you're truly expressing your devotion and your love and your etc. So that's the logic behind it. It says stop making it about the language, about the exact use of our language, and remember what it's really all about: the transcendent quality.
Yeah, but does it really matter
again,
if I only light one Shabbos candle and not two? What difference does it make?
One minute. I'm just, as I said, I am not condoning for or against. I'm explaining what happened, and the context of why of how it happened, why it happened. To this very day, you have groups like Satmar or whatever it is that make a deliberate point that they don't sweat these kind of details when they're laning, like the trup or whatever it is. They'll say the words. They'll make sure the aresh is aresh and a test is a test, and whatever it is. But in terms of if you will ever hear like a Satmar or other Hasidim lane, it's a little bit of just kind of this fluid sing song. They're not really careful if am I getting this trup or that trup. The joke they say about themselves is that there are a few in the list of trups. You have a few like different tiers. You have some that are kind of basic notes, one one beat notes, right, or two beat notes, and then you have the more elaborate trups. Perhaps the most elaborate regular trup is the pazer. Pazer, it's got five or six beats to it.
I thought you were going to say
it's
shell it or whatever. It's
no, that's why I said that of a regular variety, one that
Regular
can come
one.
up every pasuk or every other pasuk.
Right,
The pazer.
right.
So the joke they say about themselves is somebody's kind of motoring his way through the laning, and somebody says, "So in a puzzle." The guy standing next to him whispers to him and says, "Time to throw in a puzzle."
Mhm.
Just
I'm
throw
not
in a puzzle.
happy.
So, 1 minute, Paula, I get it. Hang in there. I'm
You're
not
gonna get
advocating or
worse?
disadvocating. Well, yeah, yes. I am making you aware of a circumstance again, and what it was born out of. Now, I think Paula, you should for you as Jerry can attest to, Chabad was not of that general mindset. Chabad was not of that general mindset, while at the foundation of that philosophy, that Yiddishkeit must transcend your articulation, et cetera, that it cannot be just about whether you're pronouncing and how exact you're pronouncing, et cetera, is definitely true. You can have your cake and eat it too, and we're going to come to this in a moment. And so Chabad is very. In fact, on my grandfather's headstone, my father's headstone, it is actually inscribed on the headstone as one of his great life accolades, is that he was one of those who was particularly careful. His laning was beautiful because he managed to be careful with every last diuk and every last pronunciation and of the trup and the kudot and the where in the word it should come, etc., without, in a sense, losing the beautiful flow of it. So manage both, in these various sports or whatever it is. There's the technical score and there's the artistic score, right? That sometimes somebody can do it technically perfect, but they've lost the artistry in their technicality. And certain people are all about the artistry, but maybe the technical details are not as sharp as they could otherwise be. My grandfather, this is what it says on, and anybody who I speak to, who remembers, it says, "Oh, Reb Moshe Aaron, when Reb Moshe Aaron laned, it was perfect. It was on in both aspects. He didn't lose the beauty while pursuing the details, and he didn't lose the details while pursuing the beauty, etc." So Chabad invests effort into that. And when I teach my own children to lane, I make sure that that even for the bar mitzvah, there isn't, for your bar mitzvah, you're a 13-year-old, so whatever you do will be okay as long as you're not tripping up all over yourself. But rather, it
No,
should be
no,
as
no,
exact.
no.
If you're doing it, do it properly and correct. For example, the
I
same
thought,
reason.
okay, but this is assuming that you're pronouncing every single syllable, right? Because I thought you were supposed to.
Not necessarily. If it's an
What do you mean?
elided syllable, you don't pronounce it distinctly.
Like when you
have to
do the
read-
18-minute, what you call it, the Megillah, you pronounce every single syllable, don't you?
Correct. No. I think, and yes, but we're talking about the next layer of exactness.
Right.
Forget just pronouncing every syllable, but also giving each particular vowel. If it's a shvana, if it's a shvanach, etc. When there's words that have kind of the bridge between them, to make sure, and you put that the trup is on the proper. This is one of the things that I am my kids will tell me, and any bar mitzvah boy that I tutor, I am an absolute what's it called about this. I am a taskmaster about this, which is that you have to put the trup on the right syllable of the word. For example, it could be vayiru or vayiru. Which one is it, right? And I'm not going to let you get away with that. What I mean, I said the word properly and I put the right trup. So who cares if I put it on the wrong syllable? So I say, because it would be very strange if you put the emphasis on the wrong syllable.
My father always said that.
Right? So as far as Chabad is concerned, again, this is not to in a sense pat ourselves on the back, but one of the things in which Chabad deviates from a lot of old Hasidic tradition is in this regard as well. That we do kind of, and for a while it was considered as like what? Well, you don't take the battles, in those days, you don't take the battle seriously enough. that you're willing to, in a sense, blur these lines. And Chabad's attitude, I think, and this kind of ties back a little bit to the contrast between these two parshas, Parshat Kedoshim and Parshat Emor. Parshat Kedoshim says, "Be holy," right? Be holy. And we are immediately assume that what we're talking about is this transcendent, purist, puritanical holiness. And then the parsha says, opens up as we were talking about last week, be holy. Be holy. What does holiness look like? Be accepting and forgiving and loving, right? And leave a part of your field for the poor person. And in judgment, be fair and be caring, and don't turn away the converts, right? And don't treat them any different. And that's holiness. That's holiness. In other words, that Hashem wants, in this case, for you to be accepting and loving and positive and good and all these things. And that's, God says, that's holiness, right? I shared a story in which a couple of weeks ago in Shul that in the yeshivas, it wasn't good enough to grow academically. You had to grow spiritually. You had to grow in a sense in your own connection with God. And these yeshivas have to this day, and will always have, it was built into Chabad structure, not just the Rosh Yeshiva, whose job is to grow your academic understanding of Torah, but also what we call the mashpia, the mentor, whose role is to really take care and take notice and guide each of the yeshiva bachrim in their spiritual growth. And in Chabad Yeshiva, this person actually holds greater prominence in the community than the Rosh Yeshiva. Believe it or not, this person who works on that ephemeral thing called your spiritual growth, right? Your character growth and your devotion to God, your refinement, etc. But this person holds greater sway than the one who knows the Talmud the best. And in the earlier generation, prior, this goes to the 6th generation of Chabad, i.e., the Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, in the days of the height of the misery that was Jewish life in the Pale of Settlement under communism. Everybody was starving and nobody had anything, and Judaism was always with. We were doing every act of Judaism was a risk was a risk to your life, etc. You can imagine in this setting, in this pressure cooker, actually ended up producing like the best yeshiva bachar. Because sometimes, the pressure cooker, is what produces the diamonds. So when the story goes that Rabbi Yecheskel Fagin was one of the great mashpiyas, one of the most illustrious names in Chabad history. He was truly a holy man. A holy man. And in Chabad, to a certain degree, the holier you are, the less of the honorifics you receive. Nobody would call him Harav Hagon Hatzadik Harav Yecheskel Fagin Shlita. He was actually just known as Reb Chacha. Chacha is the Yiddish kind of, Reb Chacha. And that was, in a sense, the highest honorific. Reb Chacha was the Reb Chacha. Everybody knew who it was, and again, it was. So Reb Chacha Fagin is sitting there, and with the Bachrim, they're davening. Again, you can understand the times that they lived in. Every single time they said a Shema Yisrael, they were really aware that they were basically saying, God, we give over our very lives and our existence to you. Because the very fact that we are saying this, sitting here among other Jews, with the KGB possibly coming in any second now to take us away and whatever it is, that was a real Shema Yisrael. So they're sitting there. And Rachacha, the Bachrim, by the way, this is something that happens to this day. Something that I yearn. If you ask me, one of the things I yearned for back in my yeshiva days was that on a Shabbos afternoon, you're davening. There's nowhere to go. It's one of the beautiful things about a Shabbos was that the Seder of the yeshiva, the schedule, was more relaxed. It was siddur in the morning davening, and then the whole afternoon. What in most yeshivas, what guys do, they go, they daven, they eat a nice Seudah Shabbos with their friends, they sing smiras, etc., etc. Then they take a long walk, or they go for a nap, or they do some learning, But it's all meant to be a Shabbos. It's a day of rest. It's meant to be a lighter schedule. In a Chabad yeshiva, what it means is that guys are davening till about 4 p.m. Shachris. You start davening Shachris at 10 a.m. and there's no rush. And you sit with every word. And maybe you hum a niggin to yourself and you get lost in the meditation because there's no rush. And this to me was one of the greatest delights of Shabbos. The time the davening ended at 12:30 or 1 o'clock, less than half the room got up and left. Half of the shul got up and left to go eat. The other, more than half, were still in their davening. And then slowly but surely, it's a remarkably blissful, spiritually blissful thing. You sit there, and everybody, and you walk by the table. And every bacher is in a sense plumbing the depths of their neshama a little bit. It's to a certain degree you can say it's one of the places, it's one of the aspects of where Hasidim are made in these moments. So Chacha is sitting there now. I did this in a beautiful Beit Medrash in France, surrounded by 200 other Bachrim, and our biggest worry and concern was if the French bread was stale, or so that's our our physical concern. Definitely not like what the original members of that French yeshiva had to do a decade earlier when they were in Russia, right? There's still so the flavor of it carried, but definitely not that same pressure, that same. But Rav Chacha is sitting there with the Bachram and they're davening in the deep dark Russia behind the Iron Curtain, and they're in the around Shema Yisrael, whatever it is, and Rav Chacha opens up his eyes and he looks around the Bachram, and he notices that one of the Bachram is wearing a pair of shoes that can only be called shoes because they're on his feet. Nothing else about it resembled shoes. The top of the shoe didn't connect to the bottom of the shoe. There was no heel. There was no sole. There was no. It was walking in these pair of shoes in the dead of winter. It was pure agony, but there was no choice. He couldn't afford. Maybe his parents weren't even alive anymore. Who knows? But this bacher was not in a position to buy a different pair of shoes. And Rav Chacha could not abide by this. Now, it happened to be that a couple benches down was a yeshiva bacher, was one of the bachrim who came from a family that was a little bit better off. And so Rav Chacha decided to do something about it right there in the middle of the davening. He snaps at the other bacher, the one from the family's little, who was lost in his own spiritual reverie as he was davening, and he shakes the bacher. The bacher looks up and he sees that Rav Chacha is trying to get his attention. Oh, this is a very welcome development. Rav Chacha is going to clearly share with him some spiritual, even if it's without words, because they're in a place of davening they can't disturb. But he's clearly going to share something with him that's going to enhance his spiritual service. And he looks with great attention to Reb Chacha, and Reb Chacha sees that he has his attention, and he points to the shoes of the other bacher. And for a second, he doesn't. This other bacher doesn't get what's Reb Chacha pointing out. He's not pointing. He's not like pointing to the other bacher and saying, "Look at how he's his devotion and his davening, and try to learn from that." He's pointing at his feet. So he has this puzzled look, and Reb Chacha points. He said, "No," points. And he said, so he gets it, the shoes, and then he understands that Reb Chacha is trying to tell him, take notice of the shoes and help this bacher out. So he kind of makes a dismissive. Okay, I got it. I got it, and he tries to go back to his davening. And Reb Chacha says, "No." He says, "I got it, but I'm in middle Shema, right?" He kind of looks at. So Reb Chacha says, "No, no." Like, acknowledge that there's an issue here and you're going to go take care of it. So the Bacher says, Shema Yisrael. Yeah, like I got it, but right now it's Shema Yisrael time. Right now, it's. So Rav Chacha turns to him, and again, in the part of davening that you're not allowed to interrupt, and Rav Chacha looks at him and says, "Vash Shema Yisrael, Vu Shema Yisrael, Dein Shema Yisrael is nem kiffen yene Bacher." Says, what Shema Yisrael? Where's Shema Yisrael? Your Shema Yisrael right now is to commit to taking care of this Bacher's shoes. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. This is Hashem.
Wasn't it so embarrassing to the poor guy?
These what we'd like to think and understand that it's also embarrassing to this other Bacher who Rav Chacha called out, in public like that. But these were all chevra, all these yeshiva Bachrim were beyond, in a sense, that kind of, I won't call it petty embarrassment, but whatever it is, they were all working. This Bacher didn't feel any embarrassment in the fact that he couldn't afford it. It's the way it is. With divine providence, he didn't end up in a situation where he had money for shoes. And this Bacher didn't take. He understood when Chacha gave him the message. He understood what Chacha was telling him. Was trying to say that what's holiness. What is holiness? Don't get lost in the heavens in your pursuit of holiness. There's one of God's children can't get around with a normal pair of shoes, and you're in a position to help him. That's your holiness in this moment. So that's last week's Torah portion, right?
Wait, can I say a quote? There's a quote by Rabbi Salanter. I can never remember it by heart, but it's something like, "Taking care of your physical needs is my spiritual development." That's my spiritual.
Right. There's
The question from.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was saying that there's an expression that a Yid's gashmius is ruchnius. That a Jew's materialism is also his spirituality.
Yeah, but taking care of someone else's.
Right. Obviously, not saying for yourself. Saying helping. Right. Yes, Paula.
The question for me, when I heard that story a couple of weeks ago, it's a beautiful story, but it led to a question for me. As anybody who comes to Chabad of Bethesda knows, where I sit and how I daven sort of says to everybody, leave me alone, I'm davening. No, it's serious. It's what I'm there for.
We know.
I know, Anyway, there's an exception to that, though, and that's when I see a woman, in pain, and
sure.
I will stop what I'm doing, and I'm not sure that I'm supposed to do that. I wonder if that ties into this story.
So, on the one hand, we come away from last week's Torah portion with a general sense, to a certain degree, like what these Charedim did regarding Dikduk. Don't sweat the details. Focus on the important stuff. Right? Focus on the transcendental principles. You think Hashem really cares if you say Shvana, Shvana? The bigger stuff. It's the bigger stuff. It's the more important stuff. Shema Yisrael, get this guy a pair of shoes, right? Etc. That's what you come away with from last week's Torah portion. Then you open up this week's Torah portion, Parshat Emor. And Parshat Emor says to the Kohanim that God says, here's holiness, be exact and blemish-free. Be free of all blemishes. And if you're going to bring an offering to God, that offering needs to be free of blemishes. To which you say, wait a minute, God, I thought it was the thought that counts. Last week, you were telling us all about the idea that don't sweat the details. You don't need to be exact, right? It's the general picture. And the answer is no, it's both. It's both. Holiness also does mean to get it exact. Yes, to a certain degree, Hashem will get your message whether you get the dikduk properly or not. And that does not exempt you from not getting the dikduk proper. Still, work on the exactness, because yes, the relationship transcends the details. But who are you having a relationship with? The King of Kings. that does warrant your exactness and your effort to get it just right. Because it's not monolithic. It's not this or that. It's both. As all relationships are, they're dynamic, and they're generally not an either-or proposition, especially the relationship with God. And so, again, I'm not knocking the Haredi approach, and it was in response to a particular thing and a particular concern, etc., etc. But does the relationship transcend the details? Yes. Do the details matter? Yes. Does God is flexible and not demand exactness? Yes. Does God demand exactness? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. To the best of your ability, you be exact and as careful with all the details as possible, because the relationship warrants that. At the same time that the relationship transcends that. So if you don't get the details all correct, like a Baal Shem Yid or whatever it is, Hashem will still love it and cherish it. But in your position and the power to make it exact, you better do so. And the details do matter, especially in a relationship you have with God, right? Who carries the symphony of the world down to the subatomic level. And so, importantly, we have to straddle the two of these ideas. What does holiness mean? Holiness means make sure you understand the transcendental principles and don't get not see the forest, be blind for the forest, for the trees. See the bigger picture. See what. Don't get lost in your Shema Yisrael and not take care of that yeshiva bachar shoes. But walk and chew gum at the same time. See the bigger picture, and then also see the trees. Focus on what the message of the words are, at the same time that you're being very careful in the way you craft the message and say and the words that you choose and the pronunciation of those words, etc. Put as a perfection. We're not going to be perfect. You know what? I was shared something, I think it was last week, and showed that Spinoza was a very interesting type of Jew.
It's freezing up.
You froze,
You hear me?
kind of.
Tell me when I'm back. Am I back?
Okay. Yeah.
Better.
Yes. Okay. Spinoza was a very interesting type of Jew, because to his last day, he was Jewish. How do we know? Because what was his famous line on his deathbed? Anybody know? After spending an entire life as a heretic, what was his last line? It was the line he said on his deathbed. He said, "God will forgive me. It's his job." God will forgive me. It's his job. Now, he's not wrong.
No.
But you know what? You know why that is so selfish?
Oh, he froze
Because you're
again.
very clear about what God's job is to you, but did you ever think about what your job is for God? How about the fact that it's your job to be as exact and as careful as possible in this relationship, whether or not God will forgive you? You know, God doesn't warrant your focus on trying to get all the details correct. God doesn't warrant that when you stand in front of him reading his holy Torah, you're going to try to make sure that you are pronouncing it as exactly as correctly as possible. Yes, you shouldn't negate the meaning of the words, and obviously not just the physical, not just the literal meaning of the words, but we mean the devotional meaning of the words while you're pursuing your exactness. But it's not an either-or proposition. Your exactness and the perfection is demanded of you when it comes to Yiddishkeit. It is. And that is not in any way a contradiction to the idea that your Yiddishkeit, you should be aware that your Yiddishkeit does transcend the details, right? The Baal Shem Tov cherished the Baal Shemske Yidden, right? The Baal Shem Tov cherished the simple Jews who didn't know how to daven, would botch up a davening royally, definitely didn't know Dikduk. There was a beautiful a story. These the Baal Shem Tov stories that are really, each one of them is a magnificent masterpiece, in a sense, in capturing the nuance of our relationship with God. The story that a certain simple Jew, right, went in, was sitting in shul, and the Rav of the shul was getting up and was lamenting. It was one of the Shabbos, which we talk about carbonot offerings, and he was saying that since the destruction of the temple, Hashem has not been receiving his offerings. You know, what a terrible circumstance and situation. We used to give Hashem his offerings twice every day, and now Hashem is bereft of his offering. And he painted the picture very poignantly. Now, this is something that this simple Yid was able to understand. He knows what it meant to go without a meal. And it stinks. And Hashem has been going without his meal now for thousands of years. It hit home. And so came home to his wife. He says, Kamala, we're going to do something a little different. I want you to always set aside a few coins every day so that on Thursday you can go to the market and buy the best flour you can find. Then you are going to take extra time to sift the flour to make it as fine as possible. And then you're going to go down to the well, all the way at the end with the freshest, sweetest waters that we have. And then you're going to get from the chicken the egg, make sure it's an egg laid that day. And you're going to take the time to make the two most perfect challahs you can make. And she makes these challahs, and the first couple of times they don't pass his exacting standard. They're not symmetrical. They're not. Finally, perfect challahs. And he goes. And Thursday night, he comes to right before Leil Shishi, the night before Friday night, and he pulls back the barachas of the Aron Kodesh, and he looks up and he says, Master of the universe, for thousands of years you have been left without your offerings. Here, I humbly, Yaakov ben Chaim, am leaving you two challahs to the best of our ability. I hope their perfection as to the best that we can, and I'm leaving them for you. And he would left the challahs closed and backed away from the Aron Kodesh. Okay, next night, Friday night, he gets to shul a little early. Did Hashem accept his offering? He opens up peeks into the Aron Kodesh again. As people are starting to come in. His challahs are gone. His challahs are gone. They've been received by Hashem. Next week, he's so excited. Tell me when it's back. Hear me again?
But we didn't hear you after he peeks in.
Okay, I'm going to go on to finish the Zoom on my phone. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll continue, but then as I'm talking, I'm switching to my phone. So he peeks in as everybody's just starting to come into the shul.
Recording in progress.